So we were debating a lot, Joe and Mike, and how much is it worth? Because I didn't want to come up here and give a sales pitch about our company to you, which is the last thing we want to do in a conference and educational setting. But one of the things Joe would ask is, can you give a little background about who you are as a company and where you collect your information? Because ultimately, the company I work for, we're a healthcare data and informatics organization, and we collect information. We collect data. And that data is used by literally hundreds and thousands of different healthcare companies, from hospital systems to pharma to med device to home health. I know there's a couple existing customers of ours in the room right now. I've worked with Mike for a few years now in a lot of different settings with his customers. And we're this hub of information. And thought it would be useful just to, at a very high level, give you an overview of who we are and a little bit about where we collect what we do. And that's going to, I think, segue nicely into when Mike talks about some of the outbound calling they can do and programs that they can run. They're terrific. And the difference is we can't help with that. What we can do is tell you where to go. Because the short answer is, for the US, and I'm sorry for those of you who are global, where our data is US focused, we know what is happening in healthcare. This doctor did X number of hip replacement procedures last year at this hospital, ordered this number of wheelchairs from this DME supplier, had this many diabetic patients that they were treating, had this many home infusion of IVIG products, whatever it happens to be. So we're collecting all these mountains and literally billions and billions of claims, processing it, and then putting it together so that we can make it a product that can be used throughout the healthcare industry. And this will be my first time. And anybody in the room heard of the company LexisNexis, by the way? Excellent. How many of you had heard of health market science before you came to this meeting? We saw 3, and one of them works for health market science. Well, now you just saw the power of marketing, and at its core, let's see, how do I get this to work? Because as of January, I don't know, what was it, Chris, like mid-January, something like that? We were acquired by LexisNexis. So we're now Health Market Science, a LexisNexis company. And one of the reasons is they are one of the biggest data companies in the world, but they didn't have a presence in healthcare. So we filled out their portfolio very nicely. So this is my first time actually talking a little bit about LexisNexis. I've heard our new CEO do it. I'll keep it brief, but it's a really interesting story. So LexisNexis is actually part of a holding company, in essence, called Reed Elsevier. And Reed Elsevier is split up across these different functions that you see here. I won't get into our financials. If anybody is interested, come find me. We're actually part of this company right here, LexisNexis Risk Solutions. And the story about LexisNexis Risk Solutions is I can jokingly but somewhat seriously say they're big brother. Every one of you in the room has something called a Lex ID, which is used, and LexisNexis collects all this information on every person in the United States. Every automobile claim is priced by LexisNexis Risk Solutions, no matter who the insurers are. When you get pulled over, hopefully none of you ever have, by a police officer with a speeding ticket, and the cop goes back to their car and they look up your insurance and your license number, what are they doing? They're hitting the LexisNexis Risk Solutions website with all your information to say, is this who you say you are? Should we be arresting you? Do your documents not match? Or if you ever wanted to get a credit card, you're in a store and you call because you want that 2-year no interest loan on the new TV that you're getting, and you call up and you say, have you ever lived at 123 4th Street, or was one of your mortgage payments $839.12? All those algorithms are being built on the LexisNexis consumer database of information, which is essentially sort of like a back-end tie into the credit unions down in Atlanta. And they're validating that you are who you say you are. And while I made the joke that it's Big Brother, it's actually tremendously helpful in preventing Big Brother, because as folks start to get away from social security numbers, they can use things like a Lex ID, and companies who had hacks can use our services to help prevent them in the future. So that's a big part of our business. You can see, I'll skip over some of the places that my larger parent plays in, but you can see we're part of a very large company. And Lex ID, I have one. Everybody in here has one. It's like a ID that says who you are, has all your history, all your address history, phone information, criminal backgrounds, all this. And it's all publicly available information. There's nothing negative about it whatsoever. It's just, as you can imagine, that amount of information, compiling it and pulling it together is not an easy undertaking. So some of the things we do, you'll see a lot of this started in the automobile industry. There's 8.9 billion unique name and address combinations in the United States. Imagine how much data that is to process, and how hard is it when they want to figure out, are you who you say you are? 20 states or so right now have signed up to help tax fraud on this, when people are trying to claim somebody else's tax return and get that information back. And how the individual states can't really manage that because they're not IT companies, and the world of the internet has changed all of this. You're not just filling out a piece of paper. You've got people from all over the world trying to figure out how to defraud Georgia on their taxes, and how to get the information and how to get those tax refunds that you should be getting. So anyway, that's where my company comes into play from a broader perspective. But we're actually here for the healthcare side of things. What we collect is the data and the medical claims data about everything in the US healthcare system. So I won't read the stats, but pretty much anywhere where you get healthcare, if it's covered under your medical benefit, one way or another, we're gonna pick up that information. And we'll have the demographics. If you fill a prescription at Rite Aid or CVS or Walgreens, before you can pick it up, it's bouncing over to our servers in Philadelphia to say, is that doctor's license valid? If you're getting Percocet, is that doctor allowed to write that scheduled drug? So CVS doesn't get fined for invalid prescription dispensing. And I'm skipping over some of these slides that we're supposed to be using, but I haven't presented before, and that looks like a very smart slide that our LexisNexis people put together that has a lot of information and really cool stuff that I don't understand yet, but I'm gonna focus on the stuff that we do. Which, now we're getting into it. So some of the stuff that's the hub of us, which is claims analytics. That's a lot of the stuff we're gonna focus on here. That's the area of my expertise, is medical claims data, which is anything that anybody is reimbursed for in the healthcare system. Doctors get paid for spending 15 minutes of time with their patient. DME companies get paid for providing a CPAP to a patient. A hospital gets paid for doing a hip replacement procedure, as well as the surgeons who are rendering that service. You'll see we have an MDM platform. The identity analytics and linking analytics, that's the part of LexisNexis that's bringing to the table. And some of the very high-level broad things we do, obviously managing data. That's what we do as a company, so a lot of our services have become data management for our customers, where we take over the challenges that they face on just integrating the mountains of data that they have. Wasteful spending, probably half of our business, if not more, is really on fraud, waste, and abuse, more than it is sales and marketing. I'm on the sales and marketing side, that's my background. But you can imagine a lot of what we do is around the regulatory area. Huge business and aggregate spend. For those of you who know the Sunshine Act, we're processing all those transactions, and actually CMS pays us to integrate all the aggregate spend transactions from all the pharma and med device companies, so that when they report them, which I think just happened last month, was the first report from the Sunshine Act payment laws. We're helping the med device and pharma companies send the data, and then CMS says, well, you guys are so good at it, why don't you compile it for us on the back end, and we're doing that there. Some of the industries that we work in, these are the healthcare focused areas, the payer side, the provider side. We're in the life sciences side, a little bit of spillover. I looked at the attendee list. There's some providers in the room here as well. We do a lot of work with hospital systems, about 1,000 of them in the US, looking at referral patterns, splitter behavior of practitioners, et cetera. Government, if a doctor wants to get an NPI, CMS is using our data to, again, validate they are who they say they are. Have they been sanctioned in any states that the federal government doesn't know about, et cetera. This one of the things we've always had is that very granular view of the healthcare system. This doctor did this thing at this place. Injected intravenous immunoglobulin, did a knee procedure, et cetera. We focused on a lot the past, say, 4 to 5 years, is building the broader picture of the healthcare system. How do the hospitals link together? Integrated delivery networks, the ACOs, the IDNs, the GPOs, all the 3-letter acronyms that everybody's heard and are very challenging to understand, but we've put a lot of effort into building out how is the healthcare system linked together, because more and more that doctor, especially if you're a med device company, might not be making the decision on the product. It might actually be somebody in a corporate office down somewhere else that you had no idea is actually controlling the budget, making formulary decisions, making protocol decisions for your particular product. Depends on the cost, a lot of other factors, but seeing how all of the systems are linked together is becoming more and more important throughout the healthcare system. And the other slide here that I want to show, and this is a horribly ugly slide, but I'm going to put it up here because how many of you have seen one of these before? All right, we got a couple. This is what we do. This is what we collect. This is a medical claim form in the US. This is one of 2 types. This is called a 1500 form. There's a UB form as well. I don't have a pointer, but I'll put that in here so I won't point at it. So these forms are submitted. They're submitted by home health companies. They're They're submitted by DMEs, by hospitals, by doctors, et cetera. What are they putting in? This is a supplier down here. So this could be somebody that's supplied a medical product, a medical service, or something along those lines. They have an NPI number, an address, phone number, et cetera. These are some procedure codes. It's a 99 code, tells you how much time the doctor spent with the patient. 15 minutes gets you X dollars, half hour gets you Y dollars, et cetera. You see a J code there, that's an infused drug. You'll see different codes for different types of procedures that are performed. So this is how the billing works on this. You also get some other information, a patient ID number. Obviously there's HIPAA laws in place here, which we're very, very sensitive to. All of our employees have to sign it. We have HIPAA lawyers and clean rooms and all the stuff you could ever imagine. But we have this patient ID number. We're able to use that ID number to track patients across the healthcare continuum, identify referral patterns. This doctor sends these patients to this hospital. When these patients are discharged by this hospital, X% of them go to this home health agency, and Y% of them are readmitted into the hospital. I know you guys I'm sure most of you have heard of readmission rates, and that's how hospitals are getting impacted. Well, COPD is coming out as the fourth one, supposedly, that's going to impact reimbursement for hospital systems, but they haven't published their readmission rates by hospitals. So we can track readmission rates tied to disease category, tied to procedure, et cetera. And that's all by following this patient ID number down here and saying, you were discharged from a hospital. 30 days later, did we ever see you coming back in at any other hospital? And if so, tick, that counts as a readmission. You get the doctor, and then up here, these are the diagnosis codes. I should know this, what 174.9 is, since I've done this slide enough, but maybe that's, it's not, but maybe it's hypertension, hyperlipidemia, it's CIDP or some other disease. Those are telling you what disease the patient has. There's even diagnosis codes for you're perfectly healthy. It's called a well visit. So you go in for a physical, you get a diagnosis of nothing, you're healthy. That's the favorite one. That's the one hopefully everybody in the room has. Since you've all been to doctors, have health insurance, you've got ICD10 diagnosis codes on your claim forms that you're submitting, whether it's going to Aetna or Cigna or whoever your particular carrier is. So these are some of the things that we're picking up. We collect and process these claims, and literally I think it's about 1.2-ish billion of them a year that we process. But nobody wants that level of detail, and frankly, we'd go to jail if we were giving it. So what we do is we provide statistics. This doctor treated this volume of patients at this facility. This doctor did this number of procedures at this location. Cleveland Clinic did 47 open heart surgeries. 16 of them were performed by Dr. Smith. Dr. Sperduti here did 26 of them. And you can imagine it goes on and on from there. There's just one other story I want to tell, is a cool med device thing that we've built. We do a lot of this in hospitals. You mentioned Zimmer earlier. I know the folks at Zimmer well, but this isn't their case study, but it's a similar market. This is knees. So this is actually real doctors, Dr. Gettens and Dr. Fata. They're orthopedic surgeons. And they do knee replacements. So the med device manufacturers, they want to know who does the most knees. That's easy. Dr. Gettens did 82 of them, and here's where he did them, and Dr. Fata did 67 of them, here's where Dr. Fata did them. But the real thing is, if you're a Zimmer, a Stryker, a DePuy, one of those knee manufacturers, there's a good chance you've got Dr. Gettens. If he's a Stryker loyalist, he's probably been with Stryker for 10 years. My buddy's a Stryker rep. His doctors wouldn't leave. He goes to dinner with them. He's got a pager. He's on call to go scrub into the ER. You're not going to switch those. If you do, fantastic. You're going to hit your number for the next 5 years, and your company's going to love you. But it's going to be really hard to switch the surgeons unless there's a problem with the product. Unless your competitor messes up, that's going to be hard. So how can you drive more business? Well, if you know Dr. Gettens is loyal to your product, Dr. Fata's not, clearly you're going to try to get Dr. Fata. But rather than focusing on the surgeon, what if you go downstream and say, where are his patients coming from? So these are all the PCPs that referred patients with knee pain to Dr. Fata. Knee pain, if you go back to that claim form, that's a diagnosis code. So we can go and say, who are the PCPs that are diagnosing patients with knee pain? And then we can follow them and say, where'd they get their procedure done? Oh, they had it done at Dr. Fata. All these had it done at Dr. Gettens. The ones in the middle you might expect, they split. Red line means he's sending more over to Gettens. We call this influence networks, referral patterns, whatever term you want to use. But ultimately, if you're a sales rep for one of these manufacturers, sure, you're going to try, but you're going to be banging your head against the wall trying to get FADA to convert to your product. But what if you can go out here? What if you can go to the primary care folks that are really treating the patients and educate them the benefits of your product? Potentially indirectly, the outcomes of Dr. Gettin's. Maybe you go online and look at health grades and say, look, Dr. Gettin's patients love him. He's easier to get to, he's got a better bedside manner, and you're educating them on why they should send the patients over here, knowing if you just switch one of these lines, Gettin's is going to use your name. So that's sort of the second step up. And then as you can imagine, and I'll sort of end my story on this, we have a lot of slides here. For those of you who did do the homework, the two of you who did your homework, we have your results depending on how the time goes and what we want to do. We can show some real data that people had asked for that we pulled specific to this meeting. And we've got tons of other samples and such that we can do. But as you'd imagine, there's a ton of different ways to disseminate this. There's mobile platforms on iPads that we can roll out through partners that we have, and workbooks that you can get where you can just have the data in Excel. So a lot of different ways to get the information out, which is also a really important part of the puzzle that I don't focus on a lot and probably won't be a huge talk today, but making sure the information gets in the hands of the right people in a way that they can manage and get something out of.
First, that was great. Second, I didn't write tomorrow's announcement yet, but I think I know what I want to write about. That slide that you did before with Gettin's and FADA. Would you do a webinar for the group?
Yep.
Let's do that, because that's really good stuff. Ultimately, a lot of people in this room, the manufacturers anyhow, are thinking, this is what I just heard. You have an inconceivable amount of data about everything. Fair? Inconceivable,
yes.
Strong, but
yes.
You have so much data
Yes.
that I don't even know how to manipulate it yet to help me. So I'm a medical device manufacturer. I want to sell more and get into a hospital system. And I call Tim. What happens next?
So the first question we ask is, do you know your codes? Which may or may not be the case. I bet half the room knows your codes and half the room doesn't know your codes. So by codes, we're talking about, do you know what procedures that you're interested in? Do you know the CPT, the HIPAA, the ICD10 codes? If you do, fantastic.
Tim,
You're already,
stop there for a second. How many people know their codes?
So for those of you who do know your codes, great. For those that don't, we've got nosologists and coding experts on our side that'll do the research with some business context of what you're looking for. We're never going to have as much knowledge as you on those. But once we find that out, the typical process is we look and we provide back, how much data do we have? That's not a sale or a cost project. Is what we have going to meet your needs? How many doctors do we see doing this particular procedure? How many locations in the US? How much raw information do we possess about it? We can do a sample, we can do some things like that, but ultimately what we're trying to get at is, what are the markets, the procedures or diseases of interest to you? And then I'll go back one other slide that we always ask. What settings do you care about? Med device, we're probably dealing mostly in these first four settings. Inpatient, outpatient, ambulatory surgical centers, potentially some doctor's offices for the less invasive procedures. But a lot of the other markets we work in, I've got some folks in the room here who work with us on the home health side. We've done a lot of work with Mike on the DME, HME side. That's where I met Joe, was at a medical equipment conference. Home health, hospice, skilled nursing facilities. So where are you interested in the information? And then what we do is we pull the national statistics and some samples of data that we have for you, and we can show, depending on time, to say, what is it? What do we have? What's it look like? And provide you with sort of a basic list to get started with of real information that you can use to find out if there's value, vet the accuracy if you so desire, et cetera.
This is I think naturally I want to have Mike speak because of what you just said. But before I hand the podium over to Mike, do you have a question for Tim? Lots of questions for Tim. Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Vivian.
The real Chuck Vivian.
The real one.
You're plugged in.
I know that the large corporations, the Abbotts and the the Boston Scientifics, the Covidians all use your services through their economics departments. They've got scads of people to do things with it. First question is, do those people know what they're doing? Because the level of data that you seem to be drilling down on is deep, and they seem to skim the surface with what they're actually doing with, and there's thousands of sales reps out there who really don't have access to this. And secondly, do small startups and medium-sized companies, can they afford this level? Because they don't have these departments that these big companies have that use your service.
We've helped companies with this data from very small to very, very large companies. And the best part about what they do is you can, for a small company perspective, you can start with just one state. So just focus in on buy one state. And what I like to do, I'm a predictable and repeatable guy anyway, is if you can't make one state work, why would you buy the entire country, right? So you might as well start small, get things going, get your return on investment on the first investment on the data, and then roll out. So that's how you can capitalize from a small company perspective. The other thing that I think that's really important here is, and I have real life experience. In a previous life, I was hired to turn around a company that was basically flat at $20 million in sales. Great company, great product line, all the right things. It was just they needed a sales and marketing overhaul. And so the first thing I did was I wanted to find data like this. And I didn't know Tim at the time. We did our research on the internet. He had a good internet presence, and we found it. And basically, one of the biggest problems with the company was they weren't discriminating against what customers to call on. How many of your salespeople are calling on customers that they don't have the right volumes? Right? So they're wasting time with the smaller accounts. And any of us know in sales that it's as easy or easier to sell the bigger accounts. And they're actually worth the time. So what this does is the data actually enables you to, number one, focus in on the right business, the winnable business. Number two, it's able to right size your sales force. How many salespeople do you need? How do you actually put that blueprint together? You can actually now strategically do that. And then the last thing that it does, especially in consumable sales where you have some competition, is your rep always thinks that they have the lion's share of the business, right? You talk to your rep and it's like, oh, I'm getting most of the business out of that doctor or that hospital or that account. What this data does is it validates, it'll show you where your competitors are so you can see who actually does have the lion's share and what the account is worth. So I think there's a lot of advantages on why you want to do this.
And Chuck, Mike talked about the smaller companies. Just to answer your question, the bigger companies. Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of the big companies. I'm not going to name names, but know a lot of those folks well. I'll say it's hit or miss.
Microphone, Tim.
I'll say it's hit or miss on the big companies. Some of them are tremendous in the dedication from, and it really comes, I think, from the top level. The dedication that the top level puts in to information as part of their strategy. Those people have really hired and developed teams to go out, not just mine this information, find sources of data, but really turn it into insights for their business. And they're often, those will be the people we're working with a bunch of PhDs in some cases. In the other cases, there's big companies that spend a whole lot of money, and I see what they give their reps, and their reps have no idea this stuff exists. And it boggles my mind, but we're not going to go in there and tell them how to run their business. I'll drop a hint or two every once in a while, but I'm like, I cringe because I'm like, wow, you guys are like, oh, give this to Susie. She's in, Ohio. She could use this. But sometimes people see information as power, which it can be, and you want to control that and hoard it, which to a small degree, there's a shred of truth in that, but more often than not, that tends to be very harmful. And the companies that we've seen the most success with are the ones who bring in the sales force from day one into how to get this data out. What's the right level that I need as a sales rep? I don't want all the information. It's going to overwhelm me. So let pick a couple top reps that have been around for a while, that know their market, bring them into the process, say, well, what information do you want? And then there's a separate discussion. Hey, your CFO group, your analytics team, your home office folks, your marketing people, they might want a slightly different level, but those are the two people that are really going to benefit from the information. And if you're just working with the folks in the home office, those are the people I've seen not be as successful with it because they roll out what they think sales needs and not what sales actually wants and will be able to value.
The
big companies oftentimes kind of breathe their own exhaust is how I look at it.
In some cases, yeah, but there are some that are really, really good. I mean, it's a coin flip, but yeah, there's some, you're right, I agree. Yep.
Before I give the mic to Libby, I just want to say that I met Mike for the first time last year at this conference when he gave a 3-hour presentation, and I was impressed enough that he has done a webinar for the Medical Devices Group, which was one of the best attended we've ever had. He's now on the Medical Device Group Advisory Board as my go-to sales guy. He brought me to MedTrade where I met Tim, and everyone on the panel on Wednesday is because of Mike. So just a little advert about why events like this are so important, because that wouldn't have come from online. I'll be right with you, Caesar. This is my friend Libby, everyone.
Hello, thanks so much, and thanks very much for having me here. So these are beautiful slides, and I particularly love the one where you're starting to talk about influence networks, where you go downstream. That was gorgeous. My question is, in a sense, once you start going downstream, you also start kind of dispersing your efforts in ways that Mike was discussing. You know, what are the big accounts and where do you want to go? And I was wondering what kind of test case you've done to say that those doctors where you think you have an influence network, which is kind of a very catch-all term, actually have influence in terms of the decisions of what devices those surgeons are going to use. It's a beautiful slide. I just wonder where we have the real flow of the data that they have a kick effect on upping the sales.
So I don't have a case study on that, probably because as much of anything else is, I've got really good case studies with a company called Halyard Health that let me use their branding. They used to be Kimberly-Clark Healthcare, and they use some of this stuff. I got some stories on them, another one at Target Medical. But med device, more than pharma and other companies, they don't want to get their name out there. Everything's secretive. So, but what I have is the information that those influence networks, the reason that the med device companies find them so valuable is the same reasons that the hospitals do. So our entire hospital business, which is our fastest growing business line by far, is all they care about are those referral patterns. They want to know where patients are leaking out of their system, and they want to know where patients are coming in from. And that, what we've seen, and this is where my story is, the med device companies want to give our data to the hospitals. Now we slap their hand and tell them, no, you can't do that because you're not allowed to. That's not, you're buying it for you. But we see, as much as anything else, we get a lot of questions of how can we share this information with our customers because they want it, because they want to drive referrals. So Gettins and FADA are in the same business. Now, again, you can't hand the data over to them. We've got contract language because we're trying to sell to the hospitals as well. We have to maintain that. But where I've definitely seen it be effective is when those surgeons become speakers. They become part of your, as a med device company's indirect sales channel, not employees per se, but they're part of the holistic approach, because if you can get them also educating their peers in their community, it's not a sales rep. You might be a sales rep where you're setting up the dinner or the speech where Dr. Gettins is going to speak about the product. And you now have a list of who am I going to invite to the dinner? I'm going to invite all of FADA's referral sources. So it's a very valid question. I don't have a great answer, but I can share the couple case studies later that I do have.
Thank you. Timothy, I want to tell you how impressed I am with your presentation, because I'm a cardiologist and you wonder what I'm doing here. I'm still wondering that, but I'll let you know later. But from our perspective, we have two types of information. One is privileged and one is HIPAA. You understand that? So I feel like now you can through my underwear right now, because you know everything that is going on out there, who refers patients to me, how many patients I'm doing, and also the rest of the people. So is this HIPAA compliant? I mean, do you know all the patients' name and what happened to all of them, and how do you get the information? How can I get it to you? Thank you very much for that answer.
Yes.
And before you answer, I'd like to clarify. So, Caesar, as a cardiologist, I'd like to know, can you in fact tell me everything he did last year? pretty much?
Not on the fly, but
You don't have it on you? Caesar, come back after the break. We'll have a full file on you.
So here's one important question. We at HMS do not know the names, addresses, or any identifiable information about any of your patients. So from a HIPAA perspective, and yes, we have HIPAA's incredibly important in our company. We do have some areas where we actually process patient level data because we have to with insurance and those type of things that we do. That is completely separate, white label, like it's its own world that nobody else can get into with, literally thumb sensors to get into the rooms. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here, when I said we have a patient ID number, it's decrypted when we get it, or it's encrypted when we get it. So we do see that ID number and it stays the same, but we don't have any of we know age and gender and the state they live in. But we also, even what we do have, we can't provide to anybody else. So what you're getting is a count that says Dr. Carlos treated this number of diabetics last year. And then there's also even some other things in there. There's a thing in HIPAA called small cell limitations, where numbers under 11 can't be reported because of the chance of reverse engineering who a patient is. So you have to put stars in the data. There are a lot of what we go into, and it's been blessed by HIPAA councils, and we have to run it by, frankly, CMS and auditors and those type of things. We wouldn't have been in business for 15 years and been bought if there was any risk around that. There's also, I've personally signed things. Before I moved into sales, I was on the product side. I've signed forms saying if we give stuff out, I can go to prison, not just our company. So employees actually have the risk themselves. So we have to be very, very sensitive. The last thing I'll add is that we do know that doctors don't like the fact that this information's out there. Doctors don't like it, except when doctors are the ones who are buying it because they want it as well. So it's an interesting paradox because we probably sell now today more of this data to hospitals than we do to med device. 5 years ago, that wasn't true. But Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, every big name hospital is buying this information from us. They want to know, because they're, like it or not, they're in the business of making money, even the nonprofits. They want to know which other hospitals are getting their business. They want to know when a surgeon is splitting his time and doing high dollar procedures at a hospital across town using Ohio Health instead of Cleveland Clinic.
How interesting. I thought you were going to say that they wanted information about themselves that they themselves are generating, and you just made it more palatable to digest.
Sometimes that is true,
but they're checking out other hospitals. And
more often than not, they want to know what's going on at the other hospitals, just like the med device companies want to know. So it's competitive intelligence information for, that the hospitals use to find out about other hospitals, that the med device companies are using to find out about the surgeons, pharma companies are using to market, et cetera.
So maybe between now and Wednesday, we can agree among ourselves to ask Tim sensitive questions, and let's see if we can't get him arrested before he goes home.
What I can do, and I won't do it here, we do have a website that I can look up any doctor, and we can see if they've been sanctioned, where they were sanctioned. You can't see their patient volumes, but you can see where they went to college. It's nothing that's uber sensitive or things along those lines. But the easy stuff, I can pull up your information on that. The hard stuff that is hard for us to collect and costs a lot of money and a lot of time is what do you do, not who you are.
I just want you to know that my computer was not in my possession at all times, so any sites on it that might not be appropriate, it wasn't me. Here is Stuart.
Hi, I own a local orthopedic device company, and I see, if I gave you a CPT code, you'd be able to tell me which surgeons are doing that code and where they're doing it. Does that information also include what product they are using?
So it depends on the code. Most likely no, unless the code is specific. So if the CPT code is specific to manufacturer, then yes, it would. But we don't see the manufacturer. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. CPAP devices. Those of you who know, like sleep apnea type things. There's a couple manufacturers out there, ResMed Philips, ResMed Local One, Fisher and Paykel. They all use EO601, I think it is. They all use the same code. So we know, they might know their sales, and we might know the denominator for you to get market share, but we don't see the manufacturer, because remember, we only see what impacts how much money the healthcare system makes. So if they make the same amount of money from insurance on two products, we see that. There are a lot of examples, just to finish this thought, on J codes for drugs, where the manufacturers, the pharma companies, have their own specific branded codes. So you'd have to tell me, to answer your question, you have to tell me the CPT code and I'll look it up. But the answer is, are they specific? We don't have a manufacturer column. It's whether or not the CPT code is unique to the manufacturer.
I'd like to ask the folks in this room, how many of you knew about Tim or Tim's company, or the concept that companies like Tim's company are out there and this much data was available? How many of you knew that? Okay, hands down, thank you. How many of you have used that? How many of you are thinking right now, I should probably talk to Tim? Okay, so if I were a hand raiser, I would think, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but we're among friends.
Mm-hmm.
How much does this cost? Can I afford it? I'm a small 5-person operation. I'm a startup. You know, I know Mike had a great suggestion, and in fact, Kenlin asked you for something only in Oregon, and you can share that maybe in a moment, but is this within our reach?
So again, I don't know the reach. So our minimum pricing for claims-based data is going to be $7,500. So usually that is okay. That can get you a couple buckets for one state or a couple states for one bucket. Buckets are groups of codes. Get into that later. For national data sets, they can run 30, 40, 50 grand for a market. When larger companies are buying multiple markets, there's economies of scale that drive that down significantly. But I would say in a initial data set, if you're looking for a regional-based deliverable, 10 grand, give or take, depending on what size of geography you're looking for, running up to, it's hard to put a cap on it because what'll happen is people will say, I want these 6 CPT codes. They actually want all 6 CPT codes broken out. Well, we look at that as 6 buckets, which is not quite 6 times the cost, but it can get very pricey. But I will say we wouldn't be in a lot of the markets that we're in, durable medical equipment, home health, hospice, those hospitals, if we didn't have at least some minimally priced, without a huge barrier for entry offering into those markets. Certainly it can be millions of dollars. But I think there is it's never going to be $500.
So one of the questions as a marketer that I get sometimes, and recognize that my door is so open, I chat with just about anybody who shows up, I really need friends, is sometimes I'll get a rather uneducated question and say, do you do marketing? And I say yes, and they say, can you get me a list? Which is, yeah. So one of the challenges that I get, I might say, oh man, do I know a guy? They're going to say, how do I know this is a good list, a clean list of this or that? I know you can very adequately answer this question, but I've certainly had experience where a list broker says, I have the names of, I have this spammer who won't leave me alone. You never see it, I just delete him. But he's always trying to post something in the group saying, get 66,700 professionals, I have a list. Click here kind of thing. Why is your data so pure and viable? So one, and you did not do this, but if people consider us to be list brokers, we would take offense to that. That's absolutely not the business that we're in. We could sell lists for cheaper. I'm not going to because it's not worth our time and our product is better than that. The difference in what we have, and I'll answer this 2 ways. One is no data is ever perfect. So I'll tell you that the statement that I used to always make with every customer before they bought is if your goal is to find something missing or wrong in the data, you will be successful. And then I heard a pharma client giving a speech at the kit rollout for theirs, and his line that I stole and I asked him was, he said, everything in the data is true, but not everything true is in the data. And his point to his reps was, this is really great information, but if you're trying to find one thing missing in here, which sales reps can often do, it's going to happen. So don't do that. Use it for the value. So those are the caveats. And I would say, just back to what I shared earlier about frame of reference, oftentimes when someone's talking to me as a marketer, their frame of reference is a list. And That's why you may
ours-
take offense to it, but in fact, that's their mindset when they're like, are you the list guy?
Yeah.
You can tell them why it's different than a list, but that's their frame of reference.
And I think the thing we want to do differently is let you vet it up front. So from our perspective, we want you to evaluate samples at no cost. We want you to pick a city. We don't want to do the work for somebody who just wants a free list from us, but we want people to have had us do the due diligence up front, analyze the codes that you're looking at, run some national statistics, run the full state of Oregon, vet it out with your sales force, let everybody poke holes in it. We want to spend the time with our customers to get the right answer. We don't want to deliver a list and email it to you and, take a credit card number, because we don't.
Right.
But yeah, so it's definitely a different mentality than a list service.
William has a question.
What is the underlying accuracy of the data set? What do you believe it is? If you strip out all the miscoded margin of error, what do you believe it is?
So you're looking for like a number?
Yeah.
So here's my general answer to that, because things can vary by market. Certainly, I think you hit the nail on the head. Some of this is miscoded.
Right.
We get what was submitted.
Right.
So you've got
Garbage
that
in,
margin.
garbage out.
Yeah, exactly. But that tends to be small because these people make their money on coding it correctly.
Right.
We capture, again, very broad level, can vary by disease state. We're pretty much capturing every single facility that exists. So I say 95+% of hospitals and all the organizations. It's probably 99+% outside of prisons, some VAs, and some weird nuances like that. Capturing 90+% of the physicians. My ballpark is we see about 60% of all the claims that are processed nationally. So when I say about 1.2 billion, we estimate there's about 2 billion medical claims a year. Nobody has the right answer for that. If anybody does, let me know. And then we have, in the markets that we have, which hospital market is one, we do projections on those to go up to full market estimate. We provide up front the raw number that we have that's unprojected. And then we do the adjustments for where we know our capture has inherent biases or strengths or weaknesses. And I used to say a 10% margin of error, and I thought that was a conservative one because I think that's pretty good. But then people would start saying, well, if you're telling me there's 11, then you can only be off by 1. And if I say 11 if something happened and there was really 13, I'm never going to say that that's, it's a tough thing to say. But the way we'll answer that is through samples and providing you with all the raw underlying information we have up front. And certainly it references case studies, other companies we've worked with. That's the easy stuff. But
I know you told me a story where you would give a sample, basically giving a company's data back to them. Like, you think you have this data of these customers and this? I'm going to run and see what I have. You show it to them. They're like,
So that's thanks, Joe. That's a great plug if you want to work for sales. My bosses would love to meet you. The markets up here that you see on this list, I can tell you this. We would not play in these markets if our data wasn't good enough, because we're selling them data that they're validating against themselves. We could play in pharma and med device because the barrier for accuracy is so much lower than it is in hospitals or DMEs or something like that. When we sell to the providers themselves, they won't buy until we've shown them what we know about them, at least the shrewd ones. And they don't expect 100%, but if we don't come close, if it's not tight, we're not going to get that business. And these markets, it's a lot easier, the med device, because people don't know what the answer is. But I'll use Cleveland Clinic again because we can say them, we wouldn't have Cleveland Clinic unless Cleveland Clinic had vetted our data, same with Hopkins or other health systems or the DME companies, our deal with VGM that we have and a lot of the other markets that we have. They know everything about themselves, and we're just selling them everything about them and their competitors. So I hope that dances around but answers it as well as I can for a general question.
I had two experiences with data sets like this. One in cardiovascular, one in the foot surgery space more recently, and I saw a big difference in the accuracy. When we did what you proposed, and we took one state where we had a very high market share, there were a lot of holes in it, whereas in the past, the accuracy rate seemed a lot more precise with the cardiovascular device. So maybe there's a variation across verticals.
The biggest and there can vary across verticals. The biggest variation is Medicaid's hard. Go ahead.
We in the back didn't hear what William said. Could you?
He was mentioning he's used this data before in 2 separate markets, one in foot surgery and one in cardiovascular, and that one he had, and it wasn't our data as far as I know, right? Okay. Cardiovascular was good and foot surgery was not. Is that
Correct.
fair to say? From my knowledge, I can tell you we see no cash. So anything that's paid out of pocket, it's not an insurance claim. So don't come to ask us for Botox unless you want it for migraines. The other areas are Medicaid is the hardest to capture. So if it's commercial and Medicare, claims tend to be stronger. If it's I don't know that foot surgery is a heavy Medicaid market, but that's one thing that I always wonder about. And the other areas wouldn't impact capture. Closed systems are hard, like Geisinger, Kaiser. We can get some insights there, but they can be tricky. But again, I don't know that. What I'd say is let us run you a foot surgery thing, and I wonder if ours is better.
Neha has the next question.
Hi, good morning. Neha with a newly formed incubator and accelerator in El Paso called Red Sky. I was curious with respect to your healthcare data, does Health Market Science assume data breach liability, or do you charge that as an additional premium to your customers?
So define data breach liability.
So data security, data privacy, obviously these are all coded, but in the event that you're able to figure out who is attached to who, do you include that in your pricing?
So it really is a non-starter because our standard products have been approved to the level that you can't figure out anything about. You can't reverse engineer it. You're not getting the raw underlying data. You're getting summarized results. I will say there's a new product we launched called Early Alerts where we say this doctor just diagnosed a patient the day before with a rare disease and pharma companies are salivating over it. And that we actually do pass off the HIPAA. That one took us literally over a year to get HIPAA approval and lawyers. That's the one product where before we even do samples or anything else, the client has to own up for responsibility on their side as well. So we have a separate contract there. Again, there's no patient identifiable information, but that's the most granular product that we have. That's the only one that has something like that. And yes, in that case, there is a contract where even before we could do a sample or anything, there's a strict, if you use this for any of these purposes and anything comes in, you're liable for that. But our standard product cannot be reverse engineered inherently because of the way it's built and it's been cleared for that purpose.
You're lucky I'm not the jealous type because everyone wants to ask Tim questions. Gary is next.
Hi, it sounds like most of this is retrospective analysis. Is there a division that also works on future analytics with this data?
We don't. We actually used to have an analytics department at our company. Chris and I were both hired into that 7 years ago. And we actually got out of that business, primarily to focus on the data assets. I'll tell you what we are discussing is some partnerships with other third parties to give them access to some of the raw information to do some predictive modeling and those type of things. It's not an easy hurdle. So it's being discussed, but we don't have that today. You're right, it is retrospective. We can do some trending stuff that's up to about 6 weeks old. And even some of the alerting that's a day or week old, but for future, not today.
Yeah, so currently though, there is no one that you're not selling the data to anybody to do the analytics. You're thinking about that.
So we're thinking of that. We are open to like that partnership with the right company. It's very difficult because that company also has to go through some of the hurdles to have access to the raw data that we had. But we're not going to do it. We don't want to be in that business.
Gary, do you know of a party or do you represent a party that would be interested? No. But that's a product that's interesting for you? Okay.
If there was, and our VP of Analytics would kill me for saying this, especially on camera, but if there was something specific that you knew that you wanted us to do, and you could guide us to say, do X, Y, and Z, we might be more amenable to that. full-blown analytical consulting, forecasting type projects. And that is my background, but we're not in that business anymore.
So our A student, Kenlin, who did her
Yes.
homework, has a question for you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I have both a comment and a question. Well, first, I just recently did a study of the top 40 medical devices, including some others, as far as how they're getting data for sales and marketing analytics or generation, and 90% is pretty impressive because over and over again they kept saying, well, 80% is what they were getting as far as data. So if that can be accomplished, that's great. My question is, because we have ICD-9 codes, and now we're converting into the 10. That's going to double the number of codes. Like, how is that going to work as far as matching, like, correlation, I guess, from the former to the latter?
I'll take that question. Tim's going to get rich. You can carry on from there. That's all I had.
Nice, thank you. So we've been set up and ready for ICD-10 since they first said it was coming out 6 years ago or whenever that happened. They are backwards compatible, which is the good news. So the actual coding system, if there is an ICD-10 code, it maps to an ICD-9 code. Now, the difference is there'll be 10 ICD-10 codes that all map to one ICD-9 code because it's getting more granular. When the change happens, over time, we will start to see them become more and more of a part of our data. But when we were looking at a one-year snapshot, I mean, you're still looking at a long time before everything's in ICD-10. So we'll be running this sort of hybrid process, and we tell customers, well, hey, we can run on ICD-10 if you want. One example I know for rabies, for animal bites right now, there's dog bite, cat bites, other animal bites, and like a fourth category. In ICD-10, there's about 50 different bite categories broken out by every different animal under the sun, scorpion bites and everything. So if you want scorpion bites, we could give you, let's say 3 months after ICD-10, we could give you the little tiny bit of data we have, or we could get into a broader we can still do bites, and we'll just use the old codes, and then we'll do the translation on our end to say, this ICD-9 code in the new world means these 10 codes. And it would be blind to the client, the client wouldn't have to see it. But it is going to be a long time before everything is merged over to ICD-10. Because even the lag in the data, because we do 12-month data projects with at least a few month lag within our data. So you're looking at least 15 more months before we have a full set after they switch over.
We have a follow-up question from Caesar. I'll give the microphone next to Nick, and then we'll take a short break. And then we'll get some energy again for Mike's. All right. Anyhow, here's Caesar.
Timothy, given the impressive detail of the data that you possess, do you do regression analysis to understand the variability of the utilization in different areas to see penetration, overutilization, underutilization, quality of care, cost of care?
So we're having actually a lot of discussions around that because Lexis, not the HMS side of things, but Lexis has a division, they're called MedAI, and they used to do a lot of those type of things. They also look at socioeconomic risk factors for patients and provide solutions to hospitals, which are, you need to be calling on these patients because in the long run, they're going to be, they move around a lot, they don't own a house, they, lease a car, they don't, these risk factors make them less likely statistically to be compliant with their medicine. And over the course of 30 years, they're going to cost your health system a lot more. So they didn't have access to our medical claims, but I know there's some good brainstorming discussions happening right now around linking some of the socioeconomic risk factor data that our new parent company has about individuals. This is primarily a play for the payer market and the provider market, or the payer-provider hybrid market, but to help them identify when we have outbound calling to patients to stay compliant on medicine, to go visit their doctors, and where are the most important efforts that are going to be the biggest risks for us from a healthcare perspective. We haven't done what you're asking specifically ourselves, but there's a lot of focus. Hasn't really come up in the device world as much, but it's definitely come up in our provider segment.
So our last question for now is from Nick Anderson, who I also met through the group. And he's one of 2 or 3 people that when someone have a reimbursement question, I say, you should talk to Nick.
Thanks, Joe. My question's about what LexisNexis is doing for the onslaught of digital health. Forget ICD10 and CPT. These things are dying. It's too complicated. And younger 21-year-old kids coming out of Stanford are saying, I don't even want to mess with that. I don't want to deal with, that's what I do for a living at Intermountain Healthcare, is to determine what gets reimbursed. That, forget it. I'm just going to create a medical device that the patient uses on themselves, and I'm going to skip this. But your power to do data analytics still on ECGs, and I mean, you're going to run your own ECG with this at home. I mean, this is your own. You'll go buy this at Walmart and you'll run your own ECGs, and you don't need a CPT code.
What is it?
This is a company called Steffi out of Brisbane, Australia.
Let people see it.
Sure.
Take my mic.
But yeah, that's my big question is, what is LexisNexis, and thanks, Joe, what is LexisNexis doing for digital health? So that's that. Sorry.
No, please. Yeah. That's
When you're at Joe's conference, it's anything goes, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a company out of Brisbane, Australia. I wish you could turn this off so my boss couldn't see one of these days, but they've asked me to be the CEO of this. And so there you go. Yeah. The CEO of it. So I might be giving my 2-week notice here before not too long, whether I want to or not, right?
Wait, hey Joe, hold the video for about a month. Give him a little extra 4 weeks.
So I mean, there's a few we're not unique. I'll make that known right now, but the partnerships we have with this, there's a few companies that are doing handheld digital, this, then you stream it, IBM runs an analytic on it and says, here's your chance of having AFib, here's the next version of it has a 3-lead ECG on it. You'll do it yourself. I'm not going to need, my apologies to all the cardiologists, that I'll do it myself. And then I'll go to the cardiologist to be treated, not diagnosed. I'll spare you my 2-hour Stanford lecture on this, but
3-lead ECG is going to give you some information.
yeah. Well, I'll keep quiet some of the things that we know this can do. Yeah, we should. But I mean, this is my question for LexisNexis and things, where those of us who are inventing these types of things are saying, forget it. I mean, that's my full-time day job at Intermountain Healthcare. When Biomet or Memetics or Genomic Health invents some new thing, they bring it to us. The medical director walks down the hall to me and says, Nick, you go do the research on this. I go look at all the data. I write a systematic review for the company, pull our actuaries in and say, okay, how much have we actually spent on this here at Intermountain? I don't care about national data. All I care about is Utah, Idaho, and Arizona. And, well, Utah, Idaho, really. And I don't want to deal with ICD-9s. I don't want to deal with CPTs if I'm going to invent new digital health products like this. But I mean, it's just such a huge, the power you have still to help digital health companies identify where the most ECGs are happening, or I don't know, I don't even know what to think of it.
Yeah, so it's a great question. The answer to that is I don't know. I've been at HMS for about 7 years now, so I know what our capabilities are, and from what LexisNexis, the broader healthcare play, I mean, I think there's amazing things that can be done, and some of the things have scratched the surface. The one thing I would sort of challenge back to you on that, which is when you think about, and you're launching a product, if you're only thinking the direct-to-consumer market, you've taken away the entire healthcare insurance aspect of value to your product. If you're only selling it on the shelves at Walmart, I know myself, I'm more likely, if there's something, if my insurance is going to pay for it, I'm more likely to get it. Even if my insurance is going to have some sort of copay or something along with it. So by bringing in the insurance, at least as of today, you have to have some sort of code associated with how it's going to get reimbursed. So my question from a device standpoint is, are you going to be able to sell enough of a non-insurance based product, and will you be able to have high enough margins on it and have the price point be low enough for the consumer where their insurance isn't chipping in part of the bill? That has nothing to do with your question, but that was the thought that went through my head as you switch more towards the digital side. Apple Watch is different. They've got an advantage because they're Apple, so everybody buys their stuff. But as soon as you take off that Apple logo, nobody buys that watch. So I don't know what the answer is. From what Lexis is doing, I mean, I know that some of bringing through, when they got into healthcare, their goal in getting into healthcare was we're going to become a healthcare player, and we're going to do it by buying companies. So this has been their acquisition stream in healthcare, where HMS is the same size as the 3 they had bought prior, so we're about half of their business now. But they have some really cool assets here. And then also that socioeconomic data on humans, like not humans is the wrong word, but on all the people. How can all this help healthcare, help the insurance companies and the providers? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think there's a lot to learn and a lot of cool stuff we'll probably see over the next years.